Welcome to the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast, episode number 179. Hi, I'm Chris. Thank you for joining us today.
And I'm Jill. Chris and I are your hosts for this podcast and the founders of the Becoming Ellie community.
We decided to name our community Becoming Ellie because Ellie was the Norse goddess of aging who beat Thor in a wrestling match. Jill and I thought, hey, we want to be like Ellie, fit and strong as we age.
Yes, we do. You can find out more about the Becoming Ellie community and this podcast at our website, becomingellie.com. Ellie is spelled E-L-L-I. Sign up for our newsletter while you're there.
Today we talk with weight loss coach Lisa Goldberg about losing weight, maintaining weight, and the mindset to do both. Let's go to the podcast. Lisa Goldberg is a nutritionist, mindset, and weight loss expert with a master's degree in clinical nutrition from New York University. Lisa has been coaching busy, high-achieving professionals to lasting weight loss for over 20 years.
Her work focuses on teaching her clients how to break their self-sabotaging eating patterns and change their unhealthy relationship with food by making cognitive, habit, and behavioral changes. Through this mindshift work, they lose their unwanted weight and learn how to keep it off for good.
Lisa is the author of the book Food Fight: Winning the Battle with Food and Eating to Achieve Sustainable Weight Loss, available on Amazon. Lisa coaches her clients remotely in the U.S. and around the world.
Welcome, Lisa. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with you ladies.
As our intro for you just said, you talk a lot about mindset and habits. What are some common mindset mistakes that keep us stuck in unhealthy eating patterns?
Well, I'd say, mindset mistakes. I don't like to, I always coach my clients like the word you use matter. And so, I don't really call them mistakes.
So our first question's not a good one, right?
Well, it's really because here's the thing. I work with women who struggle with emotional eating that leads to yo-yo dieting. And these women have spent so many years trying to figure out how they're pretty good at losing the weight. They just don't keep it off. And it's because of the way they think, right? That mindset, what I call the dieter's mindset, that creates the habits and behaviors that they have is what causes a self-sabotage. So, what I always say is what you do, like you have to change the habits and behaviors starting with the thinking that got you to be overweight in the first place. And so what I was saying just before in regard to, when women always refer to it as a mistake or I failed or I screwed up somehow, and they blame themselves, when what they don't notice is that their mindset, or what I call the dieter's mindset, it's a thought process. So the dieter's mindset sounds something like, I don't care, I want it. I'm just going to eat it and I'll be better tomorrow. It's just a little bit, what difference does it make, right? And so that's a mindset that is self-sabotaging because none of those things that women think to themselves when it comes to food and eating, it's not true, right? The biggest thing not being true is I don't care.
Yeah, because we all care, right? We all care very much.
Very much, right? So, the mindset is for women who struggle with emotional eating or who go from one diet to another, is that their brain has been programmed to think a certain way from being on all those diets, from having those negative feelings about themselves, from feeling like there's something the matter with them because they haven't been able to lose the weight or keep off the weight they've lost, or even they just can't get to the point that they want to, on their weight loss journey.
So we have to get in the habit of thinking positive, not negative. Is that?
Well, it's more about you have to think completely differently, right? So let's just take, I have tons of clients. Most of the women I work with are usually between 50 and let's say 75, though I have had a couple of clients who come to me in their 80s, right? And so taking an example of a client that I worked with, she was 83 when she first started working with me. So here's my point in sharing that with you, this story. It's never too late to change. All right. So, but her mother took her to the diet doctor when she was 12,
Oh, my.
So she's
right?
been dieting her entire life.
Her entire life. And as with a lot of the women that I work with, right? Some have been taken to the diet doctor as young as 8.
Oh, my goodness.
And so the messaging to that child is there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough the way that I am. I must be doing something wrong, or I can't make my parents happy, right? So there's this messaging, or it's just the interpretation of what you believe to be that message. So women live with this. So they go on a diet, they try to lose the weight. Usually young children end up sneaking food, right? Because they don't want to be judged. Because oftentimes that food is restricted, and it's usually like the candy or the cookies or something like that, right? So they feel like they have to sneak that stuff. And believe it or not, I work with women in their 60s who will go downstairs when their partner or husband is upstairs and sneak food. And it's kind of like, well, who are you sneaking from? Right? At this point, like, who are you really hiding from? But it's such an ingrained behavior that they're worried about the judgment, but it's really their own self-judgment. That's the worst judgment. So it's really changing how you think about food. When I really start with my clients is the first question is, am I hungry? Am I walking into the kitchen and opening the cabinet or the refrigerator and I'm looking for something to eat because I'm hungry? And oftentimes that's emotional eating or habitual eating. Right? You've just trained yourself to walk into the kitchen to open the cabinets, right? Some people do it. They walk in through the garage when they come in, from being out. The first thing they do is open the refrigerator. Or they're working from home and they need that mental break and they don't take a walk. They go in the kitchen, they open the refrigerator.
Or they get off of a stressful phone call and go right to the refrigerator. And I'm talking about myself here. Because many of us have struggled with emotional eating, especially when stressful times. So are there strategies to break that cycle of having food for comfort?
Oh, yeah.
Ask if you're really hungry.
Yeah. I mean, well, one of the first things is, am I hungry? And a second thing, if the answer is no, well, what can I do instead? Or better yet, why am I thinking about eating? Like, what's driving me here, right? Like you just shared that when you get off a stressful phone call, like if you ask yourself, am I hungry? And you realize, well, no, I'm not because I ate an hour and a half ago.
Right. And it's so weird because I find my hand is on the refrigerator and I'm like, why am I here? What am I even looking for? It's so unconscious, and especially working from home, it's like that. It's too easy, don't even realize.
Well, that's exactly it. So part of it's emotional, part of it's habitual, right? It's that stressful phone call that triggers the habit, right? Or that feeling. And so a lot of the mindset work is to consider, how are you responding to that trigger and could you respond differently, right? Like whoever just stressed you out, could you think about it in a different way? Do you need to be stressed out over that? Could you change your perspective?
So the habitual part, not necessarily the emotional, but let's say it is your habit. It is a person's habit to every night they sit down at 8 o'clock and turn on the TV, and then they start to eat, not because they're hungry, but because that's the habit.
Right.
Is there any difference to breaking that habit or changing the habit than dealing with, so it's not an emotional thing. It's just what you
Right.
do.
It's a habitual thing. That's kind of habitual and environmental, right? So you're in the same place, in the same chair, at the same time, watching the same program, right? And so part of that's environmental because let's just say you were in a hotel room and you had the TV on at that time of night, you probably wouldn't think about eating.
True.
Right? But in your home, it's like the habit and the environment. And so it's a little easier to break that habit, but like anything else, you have to be conscious of what the habit is, of noticing and asking the same question, am I hungry? And so if the answer is no, could you just be willing to be a little uncomfortable sitting and watching TV without putting something in your mouth? Is there something else you could be doing? Could you be knitting or sewing or holding a glass of water or maybe drinking a cup of tea, right? And that's going in versus eating. But the first part of this whole process of change, right? Because that's what I teach my clients how to do, is change the habits and behaviors, starting with the thinking, because your actions will always follow your thoughts. So chances are always, right? We don't do anything without thinking about it first. So chances are when you sit down at 8 o'clock to watch that program, you sit down and the thought in your head habitually is, what can I eat? Or what do I feel like eating? Right. And so, but if you notice the thought, if it's, what do I feel like eating, or what am I in the mood for? None of those thoughts says, oh, I'm hungry.
You're not thinking, "Oh, gee, I could really go for some broccoli right now."
Right.
That just doesn't enter.
Exactly right. And so you think the thought and then you react to the thought, right? There's the action, going into the refrigerator and eating that thing. The process, because it really is a process of change, and it's really about literally rewiring your brain. And you have to rewire your brain for the new habit. So let's just say you want to rewire it to make yourself a cup of tea. Every night when you sit down and you're just like, what can I eat? It's like, oh, no, I'm not hungry. Here's what I'm going to do instead. The more frequently you make that cup of tea, now you're wiring in that habit, because now there's consistency and repetition. Does that make sense?
Yes. When we're trying to make changes in our life, it's easy to sabotage ourselves. And then we give up. Something, we fail. We see it as a failure. We give up. Do you have any advice on how we stop that or deal with, like, when something doesn't go the way, like we forget to make our cup of tea and we eat a snack instead? That kind of thing.
Well, yeah. So again, I don't think about it as a mistake or a screw up, right? Because you know what I mean? And so I always ask my clients to ask themselves, well, if that didn't make you feel good, what's the lesson, right? There's something to be learned. It's like, oh, I ate a bag of chips. Now you feel bad about it, right? Especially if weight loss is your goal, right? This is kind of like for women who weight loss is their goal, or maintaining the weight they've lost is their goal, right? And normally when it's emotional eating or even habitual eating, but weight loss is the goal or maintenance is the goal, you feel bad about it, right? There's the guilt, remorse, and shame that pops up really rather quickly. And so what could you learn, right? What could you say to yourself? Because the thought process could be, I no longer want to intentionally make myself feel this way because it doesn't feel good, right? So kind of note to self, when I do this instead of this, I don't feel good about my choice. Instead of beating yourself up, it's what's the lesson? And so it's about, and the self-sabotage is doing something against what you want for yourself. And oftentimes the justification of eating the chips is, if you listen, I don't care. I'll be better tomorrow. It's just one bag of chips. I mean, I had one client that I worked with for a while, and she told me that she used to say to herself, the calories I eat on the weekends don't count.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, we could justify anything that we want to, but when you're justifying, when you're creating excuses as to why you should eat something, that is a huge red flag, because you will always feel bad about it, right? If you have to convince yourself why it's okay, because we have this inner intuition. And this is what drives women bananas, is that they know better. They know what they should be doing, right? I could take every one of my clients through a supermarket and they're like, healthy, healthy, unhealthy, not healthy, processed, whole unprocessed foods. Like, it's not like they don't know.
Sure, we could recite the number of calories and all of that. Yeah.
100%. And oftentimes I'll say to my clients, you could probably teach me of things about nutrition because you're so well read, but they don't follow that inner voice that usually says, are you sure you want to eat that? Or are you sure you want to do that? And that's when the excuses come in. And so they push past what I call their inner knowing, and they do the thing anyway. And then they feel bad about it. That's self-sabotage.
Okay, yes.
And a lot of the self-sabotage is formed based on a lot of some limiting beliefs are conscious and some limiting beliefs are subconscious.
What does that mean?
Well, that means like a lot of women don't feel good enough, right? They don't feel like they deserve to be thin or they deserve to feel better, right? There's some kind of internal messaging or programming that happened when they were younger. But you don't walk around thinking, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve this, right? But that's the subconscious programming. And so you act as if, right? Those are your behaviors. Those are your responses. And so eating a whole bag of cookies, I believe that it's almost like a self-punishment because you know you're going to feel terrible because you've done it before, right? So you're familiar with the feeling. More of a conscious thought that is self-sabotaging is, I'll never be able to lose the weight, so why even try? So many women have that underlying voice in their head, and if they pay attention, that they can hear. And so your brain believes what you tell it the most, and your brain looks for evidence of what you believe is true. As an example of that, it's like if you don't believe that you could lose weight and keep it off, you're going to eat or emotionally eat or habitually eat or self-sabotage yourself with food. And then the thought is to yourself, see there, I told you you couldn't do it, right? That self-talk.
Well, I know a lot of us has spent a lot of time over the years trying to diet, and we know that yo-yo dieting can cause problems with metabolism and things like bone health. How do we figure out the best way to eat and just live a healthy life?
Well, so, here's my philosophy on that. I don't subscribe. I guess if I was going to say I subscribe to any kind of way of eating, it's low glycemic index. So I'm not a carb phobic nutritionist. I truly believe there's nothing you can't eat. I have a way in which I coach, which is how much and how often in 7 days. So you can have a couple of cookies, you can have some mac and cheese, you can have a cheeseburger and fries, maybe once or twice a week, right? If you're feeding yourself well, if you're not overeating, because most people struggle with their weight because they eat too much food when they're eating and they eat when they're not hungry. So what I really teach is the shades of gray. From a carbohydrate point of view, which, the diet industry has taught women and everyone, women and men, to fear carbs, right? You eat that bowl of pasta, you're going to gain 10 pounds. That's not true. You eat a large bowl of pasta most days of the week and you're not exercising, right, at the intensity to use that carbohydrate for fuel, well, then you're going to gain weight. But if you have a reasonable size serving of pasta with some chicken or some shrimp or some meatballs, some protein in that dish, and that's your meal, right? And maybe you don't finish the bowl because you recognize that you're content before the bowl is empty, that's not going to make you gain weight, right? The mac and cheese, a reasonable amount once a week, isn't going to make you gain weight. And the 7 days gives my clients a way of kind of maintaining balance, right? So if you have an ice cream sundae one day for dessert, if you're out and it's a celebration or you just feel like an ice cream sundae, rather than beat yourself up, make the decision, I'm going to choose to have this. How do I balance out the rest of my week if weight loss is my goal, right? I'm going to go and I teach people how to establish their way of being around food and eating because their way of being is different for everybody, right? Like I have my way of being. I can go into a grocery store, be out of there in 30 minutes because I buy the same things. Right? I have what I call my repertoire, so to speak. What I eat for breakfast, what I eat for lunch, maybe dinner changes a little bit when I'm out, but when I'm home, there's usually a rotation of certain things that I make for myself, right? That's my way of being. So it's not like I don't indulge myself. It's not like I never have a cheeseburger. It's not like I never eat French fries. It's not like I never have some chocolate or candy or whatever it is every now and again. But I'm mindful of how often I do it because maintaining my weight is important to me. So it's a different way of thinking about what you're doing. And so when women get into the rhythm and they give themselves permission to indulge, now, I said earlier, your words are important, your words matter. So you don't treat yourself with food and you don't reward yourself with food, right? I always say puppies get rewarded with food, not people. And if you're going to treat yourself to something, food isn't special. And the stuff people typically call a treat is fattening and unhealthy. So if you're going to treat yourself, buy yourself a new lipstick, get a haircut, buy an article of clothing that you've been wanting, buy yourself something a little bit more expensive that you might not buy yourself, that's a treat, right? Something you wouldn't do for yourself, right? That makes you feel good. That's going to last a lot longer than the cupcake. The word for that is an indulgence, right? We get to indulge ourselves with some unhealthy food once in a while just because it tastes good. There are no health benefits. food high in fat, sugar, and calories, except for the fact that it gives us some pleasure. So if you're going to choose that, be aware, be mindful, enjoy it, taste every morsel, get the pleasure, and move on. And that's how you get to eliminate the guilt, remorse, and shame from eating something fattening and unhealthy.
Chris just mentioned bone health, and you also mentioned having a client in her 80s, which made me think about this.
Okay.
I've been reading that dieting can be bad for older women because of their bone density, and that when you're losing weight, you're also possibly losing bone. And I just wondered, is that true? Do you have any thoughts on that? Or is there anything we should do to preserve bone?
Well, to preserve bone, you want to be lifting weights. You strengthen your bones when you lift weights now. And you could lift weights at any age, right? I was a personal trainer for 20 years. I started working with a client, she was 75, right? She went from 3 pounds to 5 pounds to 8 pounds to 10-pound dumbbells, right? There's certain things you could do. You want to be lifting weights. You want to be having your calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, right? So you want to be sure you're supplementing. Oftentimes when women go to lose weight, one of the reasons why it affects their bones, not because they're actually losing weight, but it's more because they're not getting the nutrients they need because they're restricting their caloric intake. All right. So for bone density, weight training is really important. Now you don't have to go lift tons of heavy weight, but you want some resistance. You could use bands, you could use dumbbells, you could use your own body weight, but you want to do some kind of resistance training, and that helps with bone health. And in regard to the 83-year-old client, I mean, she lost 30 pounds when we worked together because she changed her way of eating. And here's another thing. Women struggle with their health, especially women who like lose a spouse or a partner, or they now live alone, or they've always lived alone. They get too tired, or they're not willing to make the effort to prepare a meal for themselves or cook for themselves. They usually opt to doing what's easy or easiest. And oftentimes it's not the healthiest, right? Or even really busy women, especially really busy women, women who are still working or women who might still have families. It's just, they'll go out of their way. They'll make the effort for other people. They just won't make the effort for themselves. That builds into your own self-care. You have to take care of yourself. You have to be willing to make the time and effort to give yourself what you need to be healthy. Right? We all want to be healthy, but think about it. Do you tell yourself, again, back to the self-talk, do you tell yourself, I don't have time. It'll take too long. I'll do it later. I have to take care of everybody else, or you take care of everybody else, but then you don't have enough juice for yourself.
Also, it sort of sounds like you're back to, I don't actually deserve to be feeding myself the best, healthiest meal that I could give myself.
Well, and there's a subconscious programming. Well, they won't say those words to themselves, but what they will say is, I don't have time, or I'm too busy. And then they'll wonder why am I tired? Why can't I lose weight? Right? Why am I going to bed at 8 o'clock at night because I can't keep my eyes open? And a lot of that has to do with the food you're putting in your body, right? The food we eat gives us our energy. The food we eat gives us our brain health. The food we eat gives us our bone health. And so the food that you choose and the quality of the food that you choose is really important, especially as we age. I mean, listen, I'm going to be 61. And, when I turned 60, I was like, ooh, I'm seeing and like feeling differences all of a sudden. It's just kind of like, you always think it's not going to happen to me, right? And so knowing that the food you put in your body, it's just kind of like if you don't want to go on medication, if you want to get off medication, because once you go on medication, it affects other parts of, like cholesterol. You take it to lower your cholesterol, but then your liver has some issues potentially, right? So the food that you eat really matters to maintain your health and longevity, especially as we age, right? And if you're carrying around extra weight on your joints and on your feet and on your hips, it just makes it that much harder the older that we get, because kind of like a car, things start to break down. And if we keep our bodies tuned up and well gassed, so to speak, as we move through our lives, it's going to serve us a lot longer.
That's a good point. Yes.
Right. Which is what we want. And Like I said, for my clients who are in like their 60s, 70s, and 80s, it is never too late to start. It is never, I don't care how old you are, it is never too late to start creating change. You just have to be committed to yourself, to wanting to make the change, because here's what I will say, it takes effort. And the reason why women and men give up sometimes way too early or way too easily is because your brain isn't programmed to think in that way. And so it takes more energy to do the new thing. The old way, your old habits, it doesn't require any effort because a habit is something we do without thinking. To change the habit, you have to be willing to exert the extra mental energy on creating that new habit until it becomes just what you do. And then there's no more energy required.
So that sort of leads up to what I wanted to ask about, which is if someone is just starting on a weight loss journey or just trying to improve their health and they end up feeling overwhelmed, what are the first steps they should take?
Well, the first steps they should take is to think about what is one or two things that I could focus on this week to create the change that I want. So what's your goal? What do I ultimately want? What is one or two things that I could do for the next 7 to 10 days consistently to start to work my way there, right? Because habit change and behavior change is about repetition and consistency. And what I find when women are willing to do it is you prepare your meals in advance, or maybe you think about or plan out. You get to change your mind, but what you're going to eat, right? So this way you know what you need to have in the house. So for a lot of women, just the planning, and then when you have what you need, when women go to the refrigerator and like, oh, I have all what I need to make that salad. I have all what I need to make that breakfast. That was easy. Now there's less energy and thought put into that because you've given yourself what you need. The more you realize that your life is easier when you do that, the more you're willing to make sure that you do that for yourself, right? So it's kind of changing just one or two things at a time, starting an exercise program. What's easy? Can you start to walk for 15 or 20 minutes versus diving right into 45 or 60, right? Maybe you do 15 or 20 minutes twice a day if it fits into your schedule versus trying to find the hour, right? People are like, oh, I don't have an hour, so I can't do it. That's not true. Movement, it all adds up.
How does it work to have a weight loss coach? And what are the advantages of having one?
So the advantages of how does it work is, when a client enrolls to work with me, I find out everything about them, what their life is like, what their health history is, what their lifestyle is like. Are they married? Are they separated? Do they live alone? Do they have a family? Like, what is that life like, right? Because however we talk about developing this new lifestyle, this new way of being around food and eating, it's got to be sustainable for the long run, right? Like I will never tell a client to do something that is unrealistic for them to sustain for the rest of their life. So it's kind of starting to see, what is your life like? What are they willing to do? What kind of and what do they want? And the benefit of having a coach is I get to point out the blind spots that my clients don't see. I could tell them what they're thinking based on the scenario that they give me when they don't know what they're thinking. Because the dieter's mindset, they all think alike. That self-sabotaging voice, the way it started, the way it got there might be different, but the conversation in the head is all the same. So I could point things out. I could give them strategy in their home, on vacation. They get the support and the accountability to keep moving forward, right? A lot of times when women feel like, and I'm going to use their words, like screwed something up, they go down the rabbit hole. Like they'll just say, I messed it up. Like, forget it. I'm done. I give up. Having a coach, maybe you'll be down the rabbit hole for a day versus 3 weeks. We strategize. I tell them what to think differently. Like my clients, when they share their thoughts with me, I get to help them actually change the thought to a new and better thought that will serve them, that's true and real, rather than sabotage themselves. Because most of the thoughts like, I don't care, it's just a little bit, what difference does it make? I'll never be able to lose weight anyway. None of that is true.
Do you have your clients log their food?
When I work with clients in my private coaching program, yes. And they send me daily food records, they get feedback. And more importantly than just knowing what they eat, I want to know what they're thinking when they're eating, right? I want to know if they're eating because they're hungry. I could tell if a client has dinner at 6:30 and then at 8 o'clock, she writes down that she has a snack. She's probably not hungry. What was going on? Was it habitual? What were you telling yourself to get you to go eat that thing? So a lot of my clients will put a scenario, like I had a client to send me a food record, something triggered her and she found herself getting out of bed to go eat. So I emailed her back a strategy, a specific strategy for the next time she feels the trigger compelled to get out of bed, what to do instead. So she doesn't go eat. So it's real specific and it's so powerful, your thoughts, and it feels so real. The dialogue in your head that you've said inside your head for ages, it feels true. And the urge to eat is so strong for so many women because they're used to distracting or numbing out from these unpleasant feelings. Worry, stress, frustration, anger, sadness, loneliness. They're used to eating those things. A lot of it is identifying, well, what am I feeling? What feeling am I trying to avoid? What's making me uncomfortable? Why am I turning to food? Because I know I'm not hungry. It's really about breaking the patterns and establishing new patterns, but more importantly, getting your brain to recognize, oh my goodness, I'm not hungry. I'm just feeling sad right now. Or I'm bored to tears and I'm looking for something to do. What else can I do that's not food and eating?
So what about cravings? People have like sugar cravings or cravings for other things that I guess similar to getting out of bed in the middle of the night to go eat, that you just have this overwhelming desire for something. Do you have any tips for how you tame those kinds of cravings?
Yeah, you change your thoughts because I believe cravings are thoughts. Cravings are
Ah,
thoughts about you thinking about that food. So if you're craving the chocolate, it's because you're thinking about the chocolate in the refrigerator or the cabinet, and you can't stop thinking about the chocolate. And so you tell yourself, I'm craving it. But it's usually, again, habitual or emotional. And there's, when women say, I heard it calling me, like I heard it calling my name. We all know food doesn't talk, right?
I do think Girl Scout cookies
Right,
talk.
right. So, right. But it's because they're there. And the more you think about it, the more you desire that and crave that. And it feels like a craving, but it's really a thought. Because let's just say you're thinking about those Girl Scout cookies and your phone rings and your closest friend is calling you. And now you're engaged in the conversation. Hey, how are you? You're no longer thinking about those Girl Scout cookies. So how is it a craving more than a thought? It's noticing that it's the way you're thinking about it and changing the thought.
that makes sense.
I have a question about intermittent fasting. It's really popular for weight loss or maintaining a weight loss. What's your opinion about it? And do you recommend it for women over 50? And if so, how?
I don't typically recommend intermittent fasting or any kind of a diet, especially for the women that I work with because they're yo-yo dieters. I once had a client, she wanted to lose 20 pounds. She was doing great. She was changing her behaviors. She was losing weight, albeit slower than her friend who was doing intermittent fasting. So she was very tempted. She asked me, what do you think? Should I do intermittent fasting? And I said, listen, if you could do intermittent fasting for the rest of your life, great. Let's give it a try. But if you're going to do intermittent fasting just to lose the 20 pounds and then go back to whatever you were doing beforehand, forget it because it's not going to work. You're going to gain the weight back. Again, it's got to be a lifestyle change. So if somebody says to me, I can intermittent fast for the rest of my life, because if I lose weight that way, I'm going to be committed to having this window in which I eat. And let me tell you something about intermittent fasting. It prohibits a lot of people from having a social life outside of that intermittent fasting. And they're going on and they're going off and they're going on and they're going off. And then they're feeling bad about it because they went off. And, how can I go to this party because I have to stop eating by 7 or 8 o'clock or whatever their window is. Look at your life. Decide if it's real, if it's realistic. To me, it's just another way of losing weight in a way that's not sustainable. Not to say that you won't lose weight that way, but the name of the game is maintaining the weight that you've lost.
I've noticed that the people who really are proponents of intermittent fasting do it like on an ongoing basis. And so I'm sure it works because that's their new lifestyle. But you're also right about having to constantly adjust for people want to go out for breakfast, people want to go out for dinner, you want to go to a party, whatever.
Yeah, so much social interaction is around food,
And if you're willing
Right.
to do that, that's fine. But for many of
Yeah.
us, we're not.
Right. Well, and that's exactly what I'm saying. If you're willing to commit to it and have it be your lifestyle, and you feel like this is what's gonna I'm gonna do to lose the weight and continue to do to maintain the weight, I'm not going to tell you not to do it, right? Because if that's your commitment, and yes, the people who tout intermittent fasting live that way. That is their lifestyle, right? And they've got a different mindset. They have a different way of thinking about how they fuel their bodies. A lot of women or even men who do intermittent fasting are doing it with the goal of weight loss in mind. And what does the dieter think when they hit that goal? Thank God that's over with, right? I'm done.
Hormones. I know, especially women hit perimenopause, they go through menopause, hormones. A lot of women start gaining weight when their hormones start changing. Do you have suggestions on how you adapt to that, or how do we work with our bodies instead of against them?
Yeah, well, here's what I think. When we hit menopause, we do have to make changes, right? We can't eat the way we did when we were in our 20s and 30s, or maybe even in our 40s. It's imperative to exercise, and that could be a walking program, right? You don't have to, start running marathons, but I do recommend, as I said earlier, some kind of resistance training, daily exercise. Like I make sure for the most part, I get out and walk for at least an hour in the morning, right? And I do resistance training, right? As I said, I was a personal trainer. I used to run 5 miles. Like I don't do that anymore because, I like my back to feel good. So, I've found what now works for me, as I've gotten older so I could maintain what I've got. And so with hormones, you do have to change the way you eat. Maybe you do need to raise the protein, right? Because protein gives you a metabolic boost. And if you are an emotional eater, you want to get the sugar out of your diet. I believe a lot of women struggle with the symptoms like the hot flashes because they eat high sugar diet, right? There's just a lot of sugar. I was very fortunate. I'm not somebody who has a high sugar diet. I had probably just like a handful of hot flashes. There's also some supplements that I took that women could, check with their doctors about doing some kind of hormone replacement, certain supplements, getting good sleep, being hydrated. I mean, there are ways to manage that, but I do believe that if you're having really bad symptoms, it starts with what are you putting in your body? You want to get the nutritious foods. You want to eat those complex carbohydrates. You want to raise your protein, but lower those carbs. You definitely want to watch that, the sugar you want to get rid of. I usually say there's nothing you can eat, but if a client tells me they drink soda or diet soda, I'm like, okay, I changed my mind. Let's get rid of the artificial sweetener. I believe that for a lot of women going through menopause, that plays a role, and it really doesn't really help your weight loss.
Well, we know that our metabolism seems to slow down after 50. And what do you think we can do to keep it revved up?
Weight training, resistance training. Because here's the thing. Muscle is active tissue. The more muscle you have on your body, like if I was sitting here next to a woman, my age, my height, and my weight, but I weight trained and I had muscle in my body and she didn't, just sitting in this chair, my body would be burning more calories at rest than hers. So that's one of the reasons why having muscle through some kind of resistance training is not only good for your bones, but metabolically, it keeps your metabolism higher, especially as you're sitting in your desk chair or, sleeping at night. You just burn more calories naturally with more muscle on your body.
We often hear about calories in, calories out. Is weight loss really just that simple as count your calories and
Yeah, no, I'm not a big believer in like counting calories. I feel like, women counting points and calories, it kind of makes you crazy. I'm more of listen to your body. All right. Like eat to content. Are you hungry when you're eating? When you're eating versus stopping at full, stop at content. Like we're born with the mechanism. Like if you think of when babies are born, when they're hungry, they cry. Before they could speak, they cry. And then when they're done, they usually turn their head or push away, the breast or the bottle. Like they give you the signal that they're done. When you start spoon feeding, when they're done, they turn their face or they push the spoon away. That's their signal. So we're born knowing when we're hungry, but as we go through childhood and your mom's saying you can't leave the table until you finish your plate, or take 3 more bites and then you can have dessert. Now we're taught to overfeed our bodies. But if we go back to listening and paying attention to where is content, can I eat a half a sandwich and be no longer hungry? Do I actually need the other half, or am I good to go? Most people will eat the other half just because it's there. So, it's about the quality of your food and listening to your body and feeding the hunger and stopping at content. And everybody's body metabolically is different. But even with healthy food, if you overfeed your body 3 meals a day, day after day, now you've got a surplus. If you're not burning those calories for energy, right? So your fat cells expand. It's got to go someplace. It's really what happens. I kind of feel like if people could just pay attention to 7 days at a time, 1 meal at a time, and start to get reconnected between your head, right, where you think about things, and your stomach, where you actually feel the physical hunger, right? We get these signals, my body needs fuel, right? Like that hangry feeling where we feel like empty and a little cranky.
Do you find that some people don't really even know how to tell if they're hungry? Like they just don't even recognize that feeling?
Well, I think people more feel like they never feel hunger because they're eating so often. They're grazing a little bit throughout the day, so they never feel hungry, because one of the things about women who struggle with their weight or the dieter's mindset is they eat just in case they get hungry, or they overeat a meal just in case they get hungry sooner than later. And I'm always like, well, what if you don't? Right? What if you don't? Food's not leaving the planet. So you have an opportunity to eat again if you feel hunger, but the only way to get in touch with your hunger is to wait a long enough period of time to actually get reacquainted with what that feels like.
Do you have a way that you recommend people eat, your clients eat? Is there a certain way that you skip breakfast, don't skip breakfast? If you just want to have coffee, is that okay? Do you have certain recommendations?
My recommendations is 3 meals a day, and breakfast doesn't need to be an hour after you wake up, because that's not realistic for a lot of people, myself included. But if it really depends on your day, right? Some people will eat breakfast at 7 o'clock, and then they might get hungry at 11, but they really want to eat at 12. So it depends on, again, going back to lifestyle. What time do you wake up? What time is your first meal? Then we figure out, if you wake up at 7, but you don't want to eat at 12, maybe it's a small snack. Now, a snack is an actual whole food snack, real food, not pretzels or potato chips or anything like that. And that snack is just enough food to bridge the gap of hunger to get you to your next meal, right? So for some people, it's 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because they eat a little bit later in the morning and they eat earlier as their last meal. Some people have a longer day, right? Their day starts, at 7 o'clock and it doesn't end until 8, 9 o'clock. They may need 3 meals and 2 snacks a day, but it's a matter of knowing you can have that whole unprocessed food snack, and it's just enough calories, 100 or 200, to bridge the gap, to keep your blood insulin steady, right? Because insulin's a fat-storing hormone, so we don't want it spiking all over the place, or going too low, because then you just, have that hungry feeling. The snack keeps your blood sugar steady and bridges the gap between your meals. So when you get to that meal, you're not starving, right? Because a starving body, what do? We overeat, thinking, oh my God, I can't get enough food to
I eat too fast. I know,
right.
when I've stretched it too long and I'm not feeling right. I eat too fast, and usually too much, because I don't take the time to feel.
You and everybody else out there.
Yeah. And I'm usually late for the next thing I have to do,
Yeah. That's why you don't want to let yourself get too hungry. So part of what I teach is have that snack on your person.
Take it with you.
Well, just know what your day is like. Know what your schedule is. That's where the planning in advance comes in, right? A little forethought as what is my day like, right? Where will I be? What do I need? And there's plenty of things that people could take, right? That's just enough to bridge the gap, to just take the edge off of that hunger until they can get to whatever that next meal is.
So I know you mentioned protein. How do you have a recommendation on how much protein to eat? And do you suggest any particular kind of protein? What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like usually 4 to 6 ounces of protein at your meals, right? I rather people eat a little extra protein than eat an extra serving of a carbohydrate to get that fullness feeling. And just like lean sources of protein. If you're not a vegetarian, eggs, turkey, chicken, beef. If you are, lentils, beans, hummus, dairy protein, depending upon like low fat cottage cheese, low fat yogurt. Greek yogurt is a great source of protein. There's so many things, processed foods that have protein added. And if you have to mark it across the label, the front of the label, X grams of protein, right? But it comes in a bag or a box sort of thing, you might want to think twice, right? Do people have a lot of protein shakes? Yes, that's a source of protein, but you also want to make sure that whatever that protein powder is, it's a good source of protein. It could be whey, it could be like a pea or a hemp if it's a more of a vegetarian protein. But again, mixing it up, because when you mix it up, you get different nutrients.
So, what about carbs? Should women over 50 cut carbs? Are there good carbs that you mentioned, simple or complex carbs? Do you suggest a low carb diet? And what about fiber?
Well, fiber is really important. All right. And that's where we get the fiber from our fruits and vegetables. And, the starches like quinoa or brown rice or anything that's made from whole grains, whole oats, sweet potatoes. I'm not afraid of baked potatoes. There's tons of nutrition in a baked potato. People are afraid of it because it's white. Add a little cottage cheese. Now you've got protein and the carbohydrate. So it changes the glycemic load of that food. And so it's really important to get the fiber, right? You can get fiber from, and protein from chia seeds, right? There's different seeds that you could use. So I don't tell people to cut it out because the truth is people like their carbohydrates. They really do. And I feel like people binge eat because they feel like in order to lose weight, they need to cut those out. But you want a serving, you want more fruits and vegetables, right? You want more vegetables at your meals and get your fiber from your fruits and your vegetables. And as far as the starchy carbohydrates like the quinoas, the brown rice, the sweet potatoes, those kind of grains, that sort of thing, barley, bulgur, you want to have a portion, which is about a half a cup, whether it's a half a cup of beans or a half a cup of grains, a small to medium, sweet potato, depending upon the size. Maybe it's a whole, maybe it's a half, but I don't believe that people could cut it out. And sometimes it's really just, trial and error. Like if you're feeding yourself in over 7 to 10 days and you're eating well, then it's a matter of assessing, well, is there a little bit too much going in someplace, right? Can I cut back just a little bit? Maybe it's just cutting back at dinner. Maybe it's cutting back, at lunch. But where could you kind of make some modifications that feel good to you? Because again, it's about the sustainability of your choices.
Do you want to tell us about your book, Food Fight?
Sure. I wrote Food Fight, oh my goodness, about 10 years ago, 10 years ago at this point. Yeah, a long time ago. And so it was really about, some of it is just like client stories, but some of the strategies that I share with my clients, because it is about winning the battle with food and eating, right? Changing your mindset. You have to change the way you think about it. Because for anybody who's listening to this right now, think about, what do you say to yourself when it comes to food and eating? How do you justify when you're overeating or eating when you're not hungry or eating at 8 o'clock at night on the couch when you've eaten an hour to an hour and a half ago, was your dinner? Like, what are the things you say to yourself on repeat that you could actually hone in on that might not be true? That if you were going to say it to a friend or speak it out loud to me, would all of a sudden you think, I know this sounds ridiculous, but because when the thought comes out of your head, you realize it doesn't really even make sense. It's really a matter of like raising the volume on what you're saying to yourself. And that's, what the book is about, is kind of just like, what could you do differently, what to notice and what to do instead. And the change really starts with noticing your self-talk. Again, because We will do what we tell ourselves to do, and your actions will always follow your thought, and your thoughts create your feelings. If you're stressed, if you're worried, if you're nervous, if you're sad, notice what you're thinking, because those thoughts that you're thinking is what's actually creating that emotion. And the beauty is, if you want to stop feeling this way, all you need to do is change the thought.
Does anything change in what you suggest when people actually have lost the weight and they're now trying to maintain that weight loss?
No, they pretty much do. They pretty much do the same thing, right? They pretty much do the same thing. It's slow and steady. Your body does get to a point. For some people, it could be what we call a plateau, depending upon where they are. There's ways of adjusting. If somebody starts to lose too much weight, we add just a little bit, right? You don't need to add a ton of food. You add maybe an extra, 100 calories in the course of a day, and then people kind of find like their sweet spot. So when people are getting towards their goal with me, it's like, I know what their goal is. And it's like, okay, let's find a range for you to live. Because let's just say hypothetically, your goal weight is 150. That's the number. But every time you get on the scale, depending upon what's going on in your life, it's not always going to say 150. So I like to have them have a range. Maybe your high is 154 and your low is 150. So if you fluctuate but now you're getting on the scale, which I only recommend weighing one time a week, is 154. Now I want your brain to start thinking, okay, I need to reel it in a little bit. Where might a little bit extra have gone in over the course of this week? And so I believe in weighing once a week because a lot of women will eat the extra and then go into denial. Like, I don't want to see the damage, right? So there's the dieter's mindset, right? I don't want to see what I did, but you have to take responsibility. If you want to maintain your weight, you have to take responsibility for everything that goes in your mouth, right? You cannot go into denial. Denial gets you to be 20 or 30 pounds overweight because you refuse to get on the scale, because you're going to be in a bad mood when you get on the scale. But I remember working with a client who she became a client because she thought she was only 20 pounds, but she went to the doctor and she didn't think she was going to get weighed by the doctor, but it turned out she did. And she was like 40 pounds overweight. Well, there's the big difference. But when you don't weigh yourself, and you tell yourself the story of whatever that is, you just start to pretend, you ignore it, and then you get to a place where you're not happy living in the body that you're living in.
So if our listeners want to follow you online, where should they go?
Well, they could follow me. They could find me at lisagoldbergnutrition.com is my website, and I have a lot of free resources there, and I have a free mini course and a page for free resources. And they could find all of that stuff at lisagoldbergnutrition.com. You could find me on Instagram and on Facebook under Lisa Goldberg Nutrition.
That's great. Oh, very good. We'll make sure we link to all of that in the show notes. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. And I just think this is important messaging to get out because I feel like there's so much confusion, out there in the world about what
There
to
is.
do when it comes to weight loss. And I think that's why the mindset, habit, and behavior change is like, if people are just willing to make the effort to change those things and change and have a healthier relationship with food, then the sustainability, which is what they haven't been able to achieve, will be there. So thank you for having me and allowing me to share this message.
Well, thank you. It's been very inspirational. So
We'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
bye. Lisa gave us such a great way to think about our health and how we eat and how to change our habits.
Oh, she sure did. She gave us such great information. A couple things that she said really hit home, and things that but when you hear someone say them, it's like sort of like the quality of the food that we choose really makes a difference as we age. Eating the right foods, whole foods, really makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, it really does. A lot of the things that she talked about, I think everyone does some degree of emotional eating, but I really am a habitual eater. It's like it's a certain time of day, and I feel like I should snack, even
Yeah.
though I'm not particularly hungry. I have to be really full before I think, okay, I'm not going to have my snack.
Yeah, well, she did say it all starts with the thinking process. Am I hungry? And it's an interesting thought because, So often we're looking at the clock. Oh, it's lunchtime, or oh, it's dinner time, or whatever. It's more of the habits and cues and triggers and things like that, rather than am I hungry?
Yeah, I remembered while she was talking about that, it made me think about one of Michael Pollan's books where he said, if you're not hungry enough to eat an apple, you're not hungry.
Right,
I
right.
think of that sometimes because I'm often like, no, I don't want the apple. I'd rather eat this popcorn.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody really craves broccoli, you know. And
Yeah.
she said cravings are thoughts. They're habits or emotions, and it's emotional kind of things, and you really need to notice around it, not just think, "Oh, I'm craving such and such."
Well, I know you really habits and changing habits is something you've been interested in for a long time.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
How did what she was saying about changing habits, how did that resonate with you?
Well, she said, "Commit to yourself." And, that is the number one priority. If you can't help yourself and do self-care, you can't help other people either. And she talked about old habits are things that we do without thinking. It's a routine, whereas new habits require a thinking effort. So both of those things that really resonated with me when you're thinking of changing habits, making new habits, so that the routine and the natural ways of doing things become healthy habits.
Yeah, a lot of what she was saying is very similar to when you listen to what people when they talk about quitting smoking, for example, talk about finding new if you always smoked when you talked on the phone, change your talking on the phone habits so
Yeah.
that you break that connection, that kind of thing.
Right. Well, she said, consider food not a treat, not a reward. It's not a puppy. I thought that was funny. If you want to treat yourself, buy yourself a new lipstick or a piece of clothing, go get a massage, some sort of feel good, but not food. Don't reward yourself or treat yourself with food. It does become a habit to do that kind of thing. But if you can break that habit, that cycle will stop.
And that's something that starts in childhood, that whole
Oh,
give yourself a
yeah.
treat as if you're good, you
Yeah.
can have
Oh,
a
gosh.
cookie.
Reminds me of when I wanted my kids to go to church and behave. If you're good, you can have a cookie at the snack time after, the fellowship hour or whatever.
Yeah.
They always, how many cookies am I allowed, Mom? Back in the day,
Well, are you hungry?
yeah, nothing to do with hungry. It was a bribe. Oh my gosh, and I think of things that I did as a mother that probably were really bad for trying to, maintain a healthy lifestyle. And indulgences, we tend to indulge ourselves with food or make it a celebration or comfort food in a bad situation. I don't
Yeah,
know.
so I think emotional eating goes in all ways. It's when you're bored, you eat. When you're angry, you eat. When you're happy, you eat. When you're celebrating, it's time to eat.
Yeah, you deserve it.
You deserve it. I did this, so I deserve to eat. Yes. And that also goes into then, like, I just went and ran 3 miles, so I deserve to eat more.
Well, or eat something that's not as healthy, for instance,
Right, it's not that you shouldn't be and that's the important thing, it's not that you shouldn't be eating, it's important to eat. It's eating the foods that are going to sustain you.
Right, food is fuel kind of thing. That whole
Yeah.
boring idea of food is fuel,
So, yes, after you run 3 miles, you should eat.
for sure. But there's certain things that really help when you're trying to build muscles and things like that. The other thing she said, it was about maintaining weight and making that lifestyle change. The name of the game is to maintain the weight that you lost so that you have a different mindset, because so often there's the diet mindset. Oh, when I get to a certain weight, I'm going to stop. And then the meal prep kind of thing was a great new habit to develop. Prep your meals in advance, because the thing that you reach for, maybe hide the things that you really want to eat very sparingly and put the other things out
Yeah. So if you know you're going to make a salad or whatever, prepare as much as you can in advance.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah. And I like to have those healthy meal things ready in an instant because when I walk in after a long day, I know when it's been a challenging day, that's usually when I'm at the weak point of the day. I'm hungry, I'm exhausted, and I'm ready to eat. I want to figure out a way to take a breath and slow down, eat some healthy things and enjoy my meal instead of just eat out of frustration or what have you.
Yeah. And even just planning is important to me, so I have some idea of what it is I'm going to actually prepare and what I'm gonna buy at the grocery store.
Is there anything that you prep like every weekend or after every grocery trip? Is there anything that you make to have on hand?
No, other than trying to make sure I have the ingredients. And sometimes I will, like, dice onion or peppers or whatever. If I'm getting it out to dice it for something, I'll go ahead and do it for the next few days.
Oh, yeah, that's smart. That's
That
smart.
kind of thing. But no, I don't. I should probably, but it would make life a little better. But I do not spend time actually prepping foods.
Yeah, the only thing I can really think of offhand is I like to make up a big batch of quinoa and keep that in the fridge. It'll keep me from reaching for pasta or something right away.
Yeah. So if I make something, like if I make oatmeal, I make usually like 4 servings so that I have it for the next few days. If I make rice, I make enough for more than one meal. And same thing with quinoa. I'll try and make anything like that. Yeah, I'll make. So I guess I try to be efficient in how I prepare things. That what I'm preparing today may be of use tomorrow.
Well, she had a lot of good things to say. I really felt like this was a very helpful podcast and one that I'm going to come back to again.
Yeah, I
Podcast
agree.
episode.
So if you are listening, let Chris and me know if you have any thoughts on our talk with Lisa about healthy eating habits or emotional eating or anything else we talked about. If you have any thoughts about it, please share.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear from you. And you could leave a message for us at becomingellie.com. And you can also find us as Becoming Ellie on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, and LinkedIn.
Please consider joining our private Becoming Ellie Facebook group.
It was great talking with you today, Jill. I'm looking forward to our next episode of the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast.
I am too. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.